que con sus pregones alegraba los rincones. En el barrio de Chambacú fui a visitar una familia, hay de origen bantú, que con sus pregones alegraba los rincones, su vida le entregó a la piragua y la quemada, y a los turistas conquistaba, y los ricos no escuchaban, su vida le entregó a la piragua y la quemada, y a los turistas conquistaba, y los ricos no escuchaban.
Hey everybody, welcome to the 135th edition of Drive Thru Review. Today I'm going to talk about Andean Abyss. This is a game I've already done sort of like a micro review of, basically just covering the solitaire game. Since that time though, I've had the opportunity to play this with multiple players and had the opportunity to try just about all the factions. So before I talk very much further now, I'm just going to kind of jump right into the video. I'm not too sure how long this will take. I'm going to cut some out of it, I'm sure. The game is not super complex though, but there's just a lot to it to explain to somebody. It's probably even quicker to sit people down and just explain to them, give them a faction and say here's what you can do, and then kind of walk through a few turns and just kind of hold their hand a little bit. It's not going to throw the game off that much at the beginning, especially with a group of new players. So I would say before I start, I do have the suspicion that you want a strong government player. So if you were the person that owns the game, has read the rules, has maybe played it before, you want to be the government. That's my kind of a gut feeling, because the government has the most capabilities of dealing with another of the three factions getting out of control and kind of taking the game over. The other couple of factions don't really have as much direct capabilities to tamp down, an insurgent faction from really, getting a strong foothold in the different areas, etc. So, without further ado, let's take a look at how it works. Okay, just want to give you a quick shot of the board at setup. This is how the game will look set up. You got different troops and deployments throughout the map. You got your sort of track here that tracks total support for the government faction as well as the FARC faction. Now, just a quick synopsis of the game. The blue player here is the government. They're trying to sort of hang on for dear life, maintain control, and maintain the society, etc., from falling to pieces in some senses. The FARC is more of a communist, more of a super left-wing insurgent faction trying to take over the government. And then there's two other factions. You've got the cartels here. They're in green. Obviously, they're the drug dealers. They're kind of in it for themselves, just to make money, to sell drugs, export drugs. Then you've got the AUC guerrillas. You can kind of see them here in yellow. They've been described as a sort of a right-wing faction, more business-oriented to some extent. I don't want to get too much into the politics of it here. They're not real happy with the government. They don't want the FARC coming in. They don't want communists coming in and taking their land and their resources and using their land and resources to, engage in terrorist type of activities. So the basics of a turn structure are actually very simple here. You're going to have sort of two available cards. You're going to have an active card, and then you're going to be able to preview the next card that's coming up on top of this deck. You're going to take actions on this card basically in the faction order that you see here. So in this case, the FARC will get the first opportunity to act. Now to set up the deck, you remove a few cards, I think it's 12, out of the deck, and then you're going to shuffle in about every 12 cards these propaganda cards, and these are like scoring cards that are going to come up basically 4 times during the game. When the fourth one comes up, you'll have a final scoring. If you don't have a victor, the first thing you can do is actually check for victory on these propaganda cards. And if you don't have a victory, you go through some steps, which I'll explain, and then you start your play again back in your main deck of cards. And then if you don't have a victor, by the time the fourth one comes up, you're going to see who got the closest to victory, and they're going to be the winner. So let's take a look at this card real quick. So you can see here that the FARC has the first opportunity to act, followed by the AUC, the government, and then the cartels. But we can see on the next card, the cartels are going to act first, followed by the FARC, and then the government, etc. So the option is going to pass to the FARC in this case, and they basically have one of 3 options here. So let's say he chooses this option, then the next player, in this case the AUC, will have to either choose this or pass. Now the FARC could have also passed, and then the first option would have gone to the AUC. And when you pass, you basically get a resource. So if you're the FARC, the AUC, the cartels, you pass and you get 1 resource. If you're the government and pass, you get 3 resources, and you just move your resource marker up like so, and that's it. And the reason for the resource difference is basically everything that the guerrillas do, the non-government factions do, costs 1 resource, and basically everything that the governments do costs 3 resources. But again, as I kind of mentioned earlier, the government will typically have a lot more devastating and a little bit more dramatic. The map will change a little bit more when the government takes an action versus the other factions. So if we look at this card here, you can see it's an event card. And this is really kind of a neat aspect of this game. It'll have a historical event, but there's basically going to be 2 outcomes. So one of these is probably the historical, factual outcome of the event, and the other is sort of the alternative. And so typically in the top part of these cards, you're going to have an event that is most of the time helpful to the government, and in the shaded area, it's mostly going to be helpful for the other 3 factions, or usually one of the factions specifically. So when you decide to do something with that card, whether it be execute the event like so, or take an operation and maybe a special activity, you're going to move your marker here. So if AUC wanted to take an event, for example, they would do that, and then let's say the cartels would then only be able to do a faction operation plus a special activity. However, if the AUC wanted to do just an op only without a special activity, then the next following faction would be limited to just doing a limited operation. But if the AUC wanted to do a faction operation plus a special activity to try to get a lot done this turn, then the cartels then would be able to do a limited operation or actually take the event. So you got to be kind of keeping in mind, what everybody else is following you is going to be capable of, as well as looking at the card that's going to come up on the next turn and what those factions may or may not be capable of on the following turn. And so once the factions that are able to have taken an action, what's going to happen is they're actually going to end the turn. These are going to move over to the ineligible faction markers box, and then these factions are going to be the only one that are available to play out the next card. And so that may be a reason to pass. Maybe the cartels didn't want to do anything, so they passed because they saw they were going first on the next card and there was like a really awesome event, or they were in a situation where they really, really needed to go first and execute something before somebody else goes. So if you choose the event, you're basically just going to do whatever the event says. And they're most of the time really self-explanatory, especially in the context of the different operations that each faction is able to perform. So in a real basic sense, what you're going to be doing, no matter which faction you are, is you're going to choose a type of operation, and I'll show you the available operations here in a minute, and you're going to target specific zones out here. So you can see here, I've got these little circles there. These are cities here, and these are mostly or 100% government controlled at the beginning of the game. And then you've got what's called departments and areas, like so. In addition, you have these lines of communication that are dividing up the departments and linking these cities to the departments in the different towns here. And so at the end of the propaganda phase in the scoring round, these numbers here are basically the amount of resources that these lines of communications will generate for the government if they have not been sabotaged. Now just real quick, some other things to note on here. You can see these numbers here in the departments and also inside the cities like so. That's basically the population in millions. So there's 8 million people in Bogota and 1 million people here in Meta East. And that's going to be useful in determining the support for the government faction and the FARC faction. So you can see here the FARC faction has an active opposition ×2 marker there, maybe you can see that. But basically this is going to give them 2 support, basically the population times the amount of opposition support. So you can say you got passive opposition, which is a ×1, so if this were to get reduced, they would lose one of their points of support. Whereas the government here has got 8 ×2, so that's 16. You don't ever want to really let Bogota fall. But if it were to get reduced here, again, you'd reduce it by 8, and if this was pushed to neutral with no marker, it would go down by 8 again. So the FARC and the government are trying to push their support markers up the track to a certain fixed number. So the government will win if they start a scoring round with 61 support or more, and the FARC will add up all their support plus all of their bases, and if that total is 26 or more, then they will win at the start of a propaganda phase. The AUC, interestingly enough, just needs to have more bases than FARC bases. And if they have more bases, and that's the only thing they need, then they win. Now the cartels need to have at least 10 bases on the board, and they need to also have 40 or more resources. And the bases, again, are these discs here, and the guerrillas are these little cylinders that you'll be turning up and then also showing as active. So they're basically underground, and then above ground where they'll be available to be basically wiped off the map by the government. And the government has basically two types of cubes. They've got troops here, which will be doing a lot of going out into the countryside, trying to, do a little bit of counterinsurgency. And then you got the police, which are going to pretty much maintain themselves inside cities and along these lines of communication. So again, getting back on track just a little bit, if you take the event, you do what it says. If you take one of your operations that you're allowed to do and possible special activities, a lot of times what you're going to do is you're going to take these little white pawns and you're just going to mark what you're going to do. So maybe you'll do some training, you do some rallying if you're one of the guerrillas, and you'll mark some little areas like so. And you maybe say, oh, I decided not to do that. And then you go, put that one there. And you say, okay, I've placed in 3 places. So if I'm doing the government, whatever I'm doing is usually going to cost me 3 resources per spot. So whether I'm actually rallying troops here, creating troops here, moving troops here from an adjacent spot, you're always marking the target with these white pawns. And it's really handy that they put those in there because you can kind of lose track possibly if you didn't have these. So again, the government's going to basically be 3 resources per spot, and the other factions will be 1 resource per spot. Now sometimes you can enhance an operation with a special activity. And so they give you these little black pawns. So let's say I was doing like an attack or something like that in these 3 different areas, but then I was going to beef up that attack with an ambush. I'd take this black marker here and put that there to remind myself that, okay, I'm going to attack in these 3 spots and then ambush here. Okay, now thankfully the game comes with a ton of player aids, but the player aid that you're going to be most referring to is this one here. Now there's 4 of these and it's a fold out. So basically you can pick whichever faction you are, turn to that page, and then you can see, what you're capable of. But you can also refer to this if it's not your turn. Let's say you weren't at the government, and then the government's turn, so you can see what they're capable of doing. And also down here at the bottom, there is the victory condition for each of the factions like so. So it kind of highlights you, so you're the government, so you need your total support exceeding 60, 61 or greater. And then it has everybody else's victory condition there, but it highlights the one for you. So you can always refer to this and have a good idea how all the other players are doing and what they're going to be capable of and doing any damage to you or not. So the government is sort of the unique faction, which maybe is another reason that you would want a more experienced player to play that, because they're not like any of the other factions necessarily. Now the other ones will have basically a rally, march, attack, and terror, sort of supplemented by different special activities. And there are some little caveats. Basically, when the FARC rallies is a little bit different than when the AUC rallies, but logistically they're pretty much the same. So new players will be able to kind of watch and see what everybody else is doing and say, oh, okay, he rallied there to get some more support, or maybe he did an attack there because he had an advantage. Oh, I can kind of do that too, So if they are watching you as the government, that's not really going to inform any of the decisions necessarily, at least not directly, as to what they're capable of. So you can see here, you've got the operations on the left and the special activities on the right. So if I wanted to do a train operation, I could train, which basically is sort of like the government's form of rallying to create new troops, possibly get a new base. And then you can see here, you've got plus, airlift, or eradicate. So whenever you take an operation, if you have the special activities available to you, then you can take one of the activities listed. Like this one says patrol plus any special activity. Now again, this may be limited by the matrix on the board when you select your actions. So again here, just a quick reference, you got the event, you've got the operation plus special activity, you've got the operation only with no special activity. So if you take that, obviously you can only do an operation without any bonus effect. Now here you've got a limited operation. What that means is you can choose one of your operations, but you can only do it in one spot, either one department or one city. But again, you need to have the operation plus special activity to be able to do kind of a super, super move. So let's first talk about the training for a government. So when you train with the government, you basically can pick a spot and then you can put up to 6 cubes there. Now you can put anything you want. You can put police or troops. So you can put those in the zone that you want. So let's say I put these here and I dump those out. So it's basically 3 resources per space, and I can dump a whole bunch of troops there. Then if I want to, in one of those spaces that I selected to do the operation, I could remove any 3 cubes and put another government base. Now the government only has 3 bases. Now they start off with these cities basically acting as a base, and they have one base here sort of in the mountains here, and then you only have 2 other bases that you can actually place on the board. So you want to be real careful about where you place them. Preferably in a high population area where you're going to be able to further get support and really drive your total support up. The other option with the training is you can buy civic action, and this is going to be very important because this is the way to directly increase your active support. So if it's been reduced at all by terrorism or anything of the sort, then you can basically bump it back up. Or in places where you maybe have another base or something like that with a lot of troops, a lot of cubes, then you can start to develop that area and kind of bring it over to your side. Now if you choose the patrol action, you can basically move any cubes here to adjacent lines of communication adjacent to that department or city. And what you're going to do is you're basically going to move along these and find any guerrillas that may be stationed there. So the FARC especially will be trying to move their guerrillas here to sabotage. So basically you're going to move here and then basically activate this guy. Anytime you activate a guerrilla, you're going to flip it face up. It's going to have that little star, which means it's sort of out in the open and available to be targeted. And then one of the locations that you picked, you'll be able to do an assault and basically remove any of these, basically one for one. So if you have one cube, you can remove one guerrilla. Now the other reason you might want to do that is guerrillas will basically sort of block off these areas here from being moved into. So if I had a guerrilla here, I'd have to get rid of that first before I could do my next action, which would be a sweep. So I can move any cubes in here, picking a spot, targeting it, and then going in there and doing a sweep. So I move some cubes in, and then I basically activate or flip up any of these guerrillas, basically one for one again for cubes. Now there's a caveat there. If you're in a forested area, you basically need 2 cubes per guerrilla to activate. It's obviously harder to find folks in the forest. Now the last action is going to be the assault. And you're going to be doing that after you've done a sweep or done a patrol. And so basically one for one with cubes, you'd be able to remove any active guerrillas, but also bases. So if you were going to remove, let's say this guy's guerrillas here, you could have 1 cube to remove the guerrilla and then 1 cube for the base, because you have to remove the guerrillas first. And just in the interest of time, I'm not going to decide not to go over the special activities. They're very powerful. You want to use them as much as you can, but just in the interest of time, I just don't want to bog down in rules minutia. I'm not going to go over those, so I apologize for folks. But again, they're really straightforward. I mean, I don't think anybody should be really afraid of the game in any sense. If they have any interest in this game at all, I think you're going to be of the mindset that it'll be easy to digest. But I will say the gist of the special activities for the government are basically quick attacks and quick strikes, possibly to remove cartel bases, to make a quick sort of airstrike in different areas. Basically just kind of enhance and sort of, use that extra government technology to take things out and sort of surgically destroy different things. That's the idea. Now I'm going to talk about the next 3 factions all at the same time, because as I said, they all have basically the same idea with the rally, the march, the attack, and the terror. So let's talk about rally. Well, if you pick a spot for rallying, again, you'll put your little marker there. You're going to pay 1 resource per space that you want to rally, and then you can rally some troops there. So normally, you can rally 1 troop per space. However, if you have bases there, you can rally the number of troops equal to the population plus your bases. So in this case, I have 1, 2, 3. So I could have actually rallied 2 more troops. And then when you rally, you'll be able to basically send any of your guerrillas down underground in that space. So you basically rally, move some guys there, and then put them underground, kind of regroup. Now the caveat with that is the AUC, they cannot rally in any space that has opposition support, because them and the FARC, they just do not get along. The next thing you can do is possibly march. So if I wanted to march some of my cartels into here, which I probably wouldn't want to do, I'd put that there, and then I would move all these guerrillas here, or as many as I wanted to, and that would cost me 1 resource. Now depending on the faction and the condition of the zone that you're moving into, you may have to activate all those resources, especially if there's extra police cubes or something of that sort, then you'll have to activate those. So it's a little bit risky to move those in, and they sort of come up from the underground. Next thing you could do is to do an attack. So if I was the cartels in this case, I might want to do an attack. In that case, I have to activate all of my guerrillas, so I'm going to turn all of these up in the zone, and then I'm going to roll a die, and I want to roll equal to or less than the number of guerrillas I just activated there. As you can see, each of the guerrilla factions gets a die, and this is used for the attack. So if you succeed, basically you're going to move 2 pieces, just pieces, not necessarily guerrillas or bases. So you're going to remove guerrillas first. So if I could remove 2 pieces here, I could remove the FARC guerrilla, and then the only piece left is a base, so I could remove that, and that would be pretty awesome. Now real quick, all of the guerrilla factions have a special activity of an ambush that goes along with an attack. And when you do that, you basically mark one of these spaces, probably with a black marker there, and say, okay, this is basically an automatic win. And in that case, you only have to activate 1 guerrilla, not everybody, and then it's automatically like you succeeded, and then you could remove 2 pieces. Finally, all the guerrilla factions have the opportunity to do a terror action. And the way that you do that is you're going to activate one of your guerrillas in a zone, in a department or city, and you're going to execute terror. Now you can also be on a line of communication and execute a terror action there, but in that case you're going to sabotage it. And you do that, you just place the sabotage marker over there, and then that will zero out the resources for the government during the propaganda phase. If you do a terror action, you'll put a little terror marker here in the box like so. And depending on which faction is doing the terror activity, they may raise or lower the opposition or support marker to neutral or to further opposition. So in the case of the FARC, they're going to try to increase it to active opposition and then increase their overall support, technically. Now this is an effective way, especially for the FARC, to really harass the government, keep them on their toes, kind of zero out these lines of communication, sort of lock down these different areas, especially for the propaganda round, which I'll explain a little bit later. But this is something you want to do early and often. So again, I'm not going to get too much into special activities. All of the AUC and the FARC, they have an extort. So after they do, let's say, a rally, then they can extort. And basically anywhere that they have complete control, they can get one resource for each of those spaces to build up resources. The guerrillas start with much less resources, obviously, because they're not as well endowed as the government. They don't have the funding of the United States like the government does. The cartels have these shipment markers that they can place out with a special activity. So if you've got a guerrilla here with a shipment, that's going to give you some extra resources when we score at the propaganda card. And these can actually be shifted away. So if this guy's attacked, other guerrillas can steal it. They can steal it back. So a lot of your time is going to be basically studying this, see what's available to you, see what you can kind of do, and try to make the most of your turn. So let's talk real quickly about these propaganda cards and how those are going to execute and what's going to happen. First thing you're going to do is you're going to check for victory. I went over the victory conditions: government support, FARC support, number of bases for the AUC, the yellow player, cartels, number of bases plus resources. If any of them have met their victory condition, then they win. We don't need to do the rest of the propaganda phase of the game. Then the government and the cartel are going to go through and mark areas that they control, and this is key. So any area that the government controls is going to be anything where they have more pieces than everybody else, and the same for the FARC. You're going to mark these with control, so maybe I'll put a control marker there since I've got more pieces. And then what you'll be able to do is basically take a civic action. Each of you will take a civic action. Now for the FARC it's called agitation, but it's pretty much the same. You're going to pay resources to flip in any area that you control. You can get your support markers that much closer to you. But if there's a terrorist marker there, you've got to spend those points, those resource points, to get rid of those terror markers, and there could be more than one. Now prior to marking control, you're actually going to get resources. So each of the guerrilla factions is going to get resources for the number of bases, except the cartels are going to get resources, 3 resources for every base, plus any shipments that they had on the board, they're going to get 6 resources, or they can actually place an available base instead. Now the government is going to get resources equal to 30 minus the number of sabotage lines of control plus the aid marker. So this aid marker may move to events or different actions taken by the guerrillas. But in the first scoring card, you're not going to get any aid, okay? So after the first scoring card or during the first scoring card, you're going to have an election, and then you can start to get the aid coming in from the United States. So again, just to be extra clear, the government resources are basically 30 minus any of these that have been sabotaged. After all that's said and done, there's going to be some redeployment of forces. The AUC gets a free deployment. The government has to move troops back to where they have a base. It's all pretty well lined out. You basically walk right through it. It's easy as cake. Finally, just after scoring, everybody's going to reset no matter who was where on this little matrix here. And then we're going to have the next card, and then we're just going to keep going. Alright, so that's a walkthrough. I'm not sure how much that will be edited down, but let me go ahead and tell you what I think. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the overview. I didn't go into every detail. Like any kind of war game, there's some exceptions for each kind of faction and things like that. Again, if that scares you away, then maybe it should scare you away. I don't know. The thing I like about this game is, one thing I didn't mention at all, is you've got the ability to negotiate, possibly trade resources, or promise to trade resources. Like say, okay, I know you're low on resources now, but you're going to get a nice boost. If I do this little operation here to, help against one of the factions that's kind of getting a lead, will you give me 6 resources at the next propaganda phase? You can do things like that, so that's really nice. But it's not going to really bog down in negotiation because you basically have a card-by-card sort of focal point for your negotiation. So like, I've got this and I can do this now. I don't really have that much of an idea what I'm going to be able to do later. I know what I might be able to do, but the cards are going to kind of dictate that a little bit. So it nicely streamlines that, and so you have these, opportunistic moments that you can sort of, go with a gut feel. Again, now if you know some of the cards that are in the deck, they're not always all going to be in there, but you can know that, okay, I still haven't seen these few cards that are going to give me a ton of resources, etc. So I like this part of it though, where you never really know where that propaganda card is going to come up. So you can't let anybody get too close to winning. If you do, they may be on the good side of that propaganda card. So it maybe sets up where maybe the government is ahead by one support point. They're at 61 or 62, and you think, oh, we probably won't see a propaganda card. But then it may just work out that they get that done, and then after everybody flips over, they're then on the available side, and they're able to basically protect themselves or do whatever they can to seal that victory, knowing that propaganda card is coming up next, because you're going to see that on top of the deck. So you can't ever let anybody get too close to victory. So that adds some nice metagaming in, and it helps kind of deal with the luck of, oh, he just landed, he just was in the perfect order, and then, he automatically won. So other things that I really like about it, I never played a game like this. There's no games like this. But the other things, sort of more thematic things that I like, is I like the sort of Civil War aspect, the divergent factions. You've got the sort of different political parties. It's much more violent than I think people are used to in the United States, about sort of government control and things like that. But again, you have the cartels, who are probably, nasty people, and you had to deal with them, and that sort of evil criminal infestation in your country that is probably driving all this chaos in the first place. But again, they're kind of working with the AUC sometimes because they're businessmen, and they'll work with the government a little bit sometimes because the government doesn't want the communists to come in and things like that. So everybody has their sort of own agenda and things like that, and there's room for backstabbing and sort of this basically merging of military and sort of political, economic interests, which really I think inform more wars than just troops on a battlefield a lot of times. So I like that. I like the modernness of it, and I like sort of the flavor of the event cards, where you've got two sides of the event it's sort of alternate history there built right into one card. So it's like, I could have done it this way, or could have done it that way, but that's just how it worked. So anyway, it's great. The pieces are great. The map's great. Everything looks good. It's really streamlined. It should play really quickly. Each faction plays totally different. Those goals are really interesting. The AUC is probably very hard to win with, probably the hardest to win with. The FARC can win early. The cartels can kind of be sneaky. That once you start building tons of resources into bases, people are going to come after you. The government player's got to be strong. It's just cool. Everything that plays really different and thematic, and it's just a pleasure to play. So go and play it. Stop watching these videos and go buy the game. Okay, thanks.